Ladies and gentlemen, the terrible, horrible events of October 22nd, 2013 didn't unfold in a screen capture. They didn't unfold in a still image. They happened in real time, in real life, in a place at a time, at Danvers High School, in the middle of what should have been a normal day, in the middle of the afternoon. And make no mistake, they didn't happen to Philip Chism. He did these terrible things to Colleen Ritzer, and she was only 24 years old. And the only still image that matters in this case is the image of Colleen in the woods. The image that the defendant painted of Colleen stripped, battered, brutalized, and violated, framed by the fallen fence, the defendant's school bag discarded nearby with his ID, like some kind of terrible signature. That is the only still image in this case that tells you what was happening in the mind of Philip Chism on October 22nd, 2013. And that's the image that Dr. Dudley, despite his thorough preparation, never considered. Because what did he say about the sexual aspect of this crime? Well, it left him with a lot of questions. Questions he didn't do much to answer. Because there were no answers in the only sources of information he actually relied on. What the defendant told him and what the defendant's mother told him. Because, ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear, that is the sole basis for Dr. Dudley's opinion. If Philip Chism didn't start hearing voices when he's 10, then there is no evidence that Philip Chism began experiencing psychosis at 10. And if Philip Chism wasn't hearing voices, and the only basis I would suggest to you of that opinion was Philip Chism, then Philip Chism isn't mentally ill. Early onset schizophrenia. What did Dr. DeVere tell you? And let's be very clear, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. DeVere has never met Philip Chism. Dr. DeVere has never evaluated Philip Chism. Dr. DeVere has no opinion about Philip Chism. And Dr. DeVere told you the frequency of early onset schizophrenia is 1 in 10,000, less than 1%. And you heard from the people in Tennessee. Wonderful, loving people with background in child development. They didn't see anything. Going to your friend's house because your family is chaotic is not coping with a mental illness. It's a survival skill by a teenager growing up in less than ideal circumstances. Putting your earbuds in is not coping with mental illness, or apparently most of Danvers High is suffering from mental illness because they're all allowed to wear one earbud. But Dr. Dudley doesn't look any further than the 90% of his opinion, and I would suggest to you it's even more than that, that relies on Philip Chism. Well, that's not a luxury you have, ladies and gentlemen. You don't get to put your head in your hands or rub your forehead. You have to consider all of the evidence in this case. And you didn't get those videos as a still images in a vacuum, or as disjointed videos without time or place. Because like Dr. Kinshirf, you were able to walk through the halls of Danvers High School. You were able to see where Philip Chism was going, and I would suggest to you, you were able to infer why. And let's be very clear, because even Dr. Dudley conceded this. If what Philip and Chism intended was what he did in the woods, then he doesn't flee the school. He finds a way to get Colleen into those woods. So what does the video tell us? It tells us that on the morning of October 22nd, 2013, Philip Chism arrived at Danvers High School not just with his school backpack, but with 2 other drawstring bags. Philip Chism arrived at Danvers High School that morning with everything he needed to do what he wanted to do. Philip Chism only brought his school backpack to that first class. Philip Chism, walking down the hall just minutes before Colleen Ritzer's class, interacting with his classmates, acting like a normal teenage boy. The classmates he didn't have any connection with, according to Dr. Dudley. And Philip Chism, after spending some time in his locker, going to Colleen Ritzer's classroom, wearing the red sweatshirt and carrying one of those drawstring bags that didn't contain his soccer clothes because his plan after school was not soccer. And these videos, ladies and gentlemen, that we've seen many times of Colleen going to the bathroom, Philip Chism coming into the hall, looking both ways, checking his pocket to make sure he has what he needs, ducking into the classroom to cover his head, making his way down the hall. As he crosses the stairwell, he slows his pace so he won't catch up with Colleen before she's in the bathroom. Completely vulnerable, completely unaware, donning those gloves. You'll see when you watch the video on a smaller screen that even now he hesitates in the doorway of the bathroom, as if listening for something to make sure she's completely unaware. Ladies and gentlemen, those videos alone give you deliberate premeditation. And now I'm going to talk about what happened in that bathroom for the next 11 minutes. And this is where I ask you to apply your common sense to what is senseless, to what is awful, to what is unimaginable. Because there was no disorganized thinking, and there was no chaos, and there were no voices. As terrible as it is, there was purposeful intent. We know that Philip Chism asphyxiated Colleen Ritzer in the bathroom. We know from Dr. McDonald that that would ultimately contribute to her death, but let me suggest to you that Colleen Ritzer was not strangled to death in the bathroom. Because Philip Chism had a box cutter. Philip Chism wanted to use that box cutter. It's the only reason to bring it into the bathroom. It's the only reason to use it as he ultimately did. Philip Chism asphyxiated Colleen Ritzer to incapacitate her, so that other than whatever contusions she may or may not have gotten in the initial struggle, she was incapacitated almost immediately. She was helpless. And we know that Philip Chism raped Colleen Ritzer in the bathroom. There are 2 sperm cells inside of her, and they are not a match to Philip Chism. They are consistent with his DNA profile at 8 locations, and the numbers are in the hundreds, not the quintillions that you heard for other evidence. But ladies and gentlemen, once again, this evidence isn't a still image. It doesn't exist in a vacuum, because only one man was in that bathroom with Colleen Ritzer, and only one man carried her pants out, and only one man would sexually violate her in the woods, and only one man is caught with his pants down. So Philip Chism raped Colleen Ritzer in the bathroom. Does it make sense, ladies and gentlemen, that a teenage boy raped a young woman with that gaping neck wound? Does it make sense that he even had time to inflict the gaping neck wound? It's clear that Colleen was bleeding in the bathroom, bleeding a lot. You heard that just those injuries on either side of the gaping neck wound would have caused injuries, did cause injuries to her internal and external jugular, would have bled more slowly, but bled surely, leaking into her body and ultimately out of her body as she lay on the ground in the bathroom. But ladies and gentlemen, think about where the blood is when Philip Chism leaves the bathroom. And we know Philip Chism didn't get to finish what he started in the bathroom because we know he was interrupted by Danielle Bedard. Danielle Bedard, who at the 11-minute mark walks in, sees what I would suggest to you were Philip Chism's naked buttocks, and walks out, followed almost immediately by Philip Chism. And he's carrying Colleen's pants. I would suggest to you can find he was carrying her underwear, intending to take them away with him to permanently deprive her of them, having stolen them from her when he had incapacitated her with the box cutter. And here's where he's supposed to be running around the school covered in blood, except he's only got blood on one hand. If he had inflicted wound D, why isn't there more blood on Philip Chism, except that right hand when he carries their items out of the school directly to a location where he knows there are shrubs next to the school building. Where Carolyn Quigley sees him in those shrubs, I would suggest to you hiding certain items, including the sweatshirt we know has blood on it. That blue sweatshirt. So he's not running around covered in blood because he just hid those clothes. And he can't go in the way he came out. So he makes his way back into the main doorway. And where does he go from there? He goes down to the end of that hall on the first floor. Is he checking to make sure the recycling barrels are still there, available at the foot of stairwell 1? And he's not covered in blood because he just passed someone. And they didn't notice anything. And he goes into Colleen's classroom and he gets both of their things, removing, as Dr. Kinshirf told you, any sign that either of them is still in the building. And he makes his way down that hallway, but he only goes down the stairs because he's not seen again by a camera on the first floor. Is he secreting both of their things in the recycling barrels under that stairwell where he wouldn't be caught to trigger a camera? And he comes back upstairs. And I would suggest to you he is making his way back towards the girls' room to check on Colleen, to finish what he started. Who knows? To find what he lost. Except he never makes it to the girls' room because there's Ramsey. And now he's got to get Ramsey away from that girls' room. Now he's got to get Ramsey as far from the girls' room as he can. Down the hall, now holding the mask in his hand, not wearing it in front of Ramsey, as Ramsey's trying to figure out what's going on. Can Ramsey help him? Well, there's no way for Ramsey to help him without revealing what he's done. And there's Ramsey in the hall, but he told you he was just trying to figure out what was going on. Ladies and gentlemen, why does Ramsey matter? Not just because the defendant's exchange with him is clearly not openly psychotic. Yes, he's nervous. Yes, he's scared. He's in the middle of brutalizing and raping a teacher and someone just came looking for him. So let me suggest to you that being nervous and scared is not irrational. As he makes his way downstairs to get that recycling barrel. But what else is important about his encounter with Ramsey? Ramsey encounters him on the second floor landing outside the bathroom. Ramsey wasn't going to go into the second floor girls' room. There's no reason for Philip Chism to be concerned that Ramsey is going to go into the second floor girls' room. So why the urgency to get Ramsey away from that bathroom? Because only Philip Chism knew at that moment what injuries he had or hadn't inflicted to Colleen Ritzer. And only Philip Chism knew how badly injured she was in that bathroom. And only Philip Chism can be worried that Colleen Ritzer is capable of crying out or crawling out of that bathroom and getting the attention of Ramsey S. Garcia. He wasn't going in the bathroom. So why the urgency to direct Ramsey away from that bathroom as quickly as possible, unless Colleen still had life in her, unless wound D had not been inflicted? You will have a chance to look at the autopsy photo, and you will see the injuries that surround wound D. They're not disorganized. They're not chaotic. And from the outside, they give you no information about how much damage they had done inside, as Dr. McDonald told you. He doesn't think he's killed her yet, and let me suggest to you, he hadn't. Yes, she is lying on that floor. The blood from those injuries is leaking in her body and then out of her body. It is gathering on the floor where eventually Vinicio Pimentel will find it. But the evidence in the woods, the evidence of the defendant's state of mind, tells you that wound D has not yet been inflicted. And Dr. McDonald told you about how long she could have lived with just those other injuries. So he gets the recycling barrel, because that's the one way to get Colleen Ritzer out of that school undetected and into the woods to finish what he started. And he makes his way purposefully back to the girls' room, and he spends another 6 minutes in the girls' room getting Colleen into that barrel. And what did that do to the blood on the floor? How did that disperse the blood on the floor? You'll see there are drag marks of blood on her legs. Does that account for some of what Vinicio Pimentel saw? It's been 9 minutes since Danielle Bedard entered the bathroom until Philip Chism enters with the barrel. Only 9 minutes, not an hour and a half. 9 minutes that she's lying there bleeding from her injuries. And now the barrel is clearly heavier. And you heard from Dr. Kincher his opinion about when Philip Chism wears the ski mask and when he doesn't. But let me suggest to you something else. He's a teenager, and it's Danvers High School in the middle of the day. No one's first thought is, I bet he's wearing a ski mask and carrying a recycling barrel because he's murdered a teacher and he's moving her out of the school. You look at funny, weird things a teenager's wearing and you think, is that the latest style? You don't think, I bet he murdered a teacher. He had the advantage of time and place. As he moves Colleen directly out of the school building, down the sidewalk, past a man who's too busy with his phone to even look up, and he makes his way back behind the field house where Emily Roach will see him. Emily Roach, who didn't think anything of it because she thought it was a custodian moving fall waste. And he tries to access the woods in that far more remote location. That's where the track team practices, ladies and gentlemen. That's where the cross-country team was running. Emily told you that. But he thinks better of it. He can't get the barrel up there. So he eventually turns around and comes back. And he enters the woods across from the school. You saw the aerial photographs, ladies and gentlemen, what the foliage was like in October of 2013. And I would suggest to you he was pretty protected in those woods. It's been 25 minutes since he left the bathroom the first time. And he will spend 25 minutes in the woods with Colleen. 25 minutes where he isn't interrupted. 25 minutes to finish what he started. 25 minutes to rape her with that tree branch. And let's be clear, it's not a stick. It's a branch. And the entire tip of it is stained with Colleen Ritzer's blood. And he used that branch to tear at her vaginal tissue. The red blood cells that were intact, according to Dr. McDonald. She was very frank with you. She can't say pre-mortem, she can't say post-mortem. She calls it peri-mortem, between life and death, when he raped her with that branch. He posed her. He painted that picture. And ladies and gentlemen, let me suggest to you, that is when he inflicted wound D. You heard from Dr. McDonald that wound D isn't really one wound. That wound D is a series of cuts that she called one wound. And we know he made them with this. You'll have it with you in the deliberation room. It's plastic. It's flimsy. The blade's an inch at the highest point. How many cuts did it take to inflict wound D? He severed her carotid. He sawed through her trachea, through her esophagus. He nicked her vertebra at the back of her neck. Ladies and gentlemen, if she had those injuries in the barrel, why isn't there any blood down the front of her? And no, there's not an enormous amount of blood in the woods, but should there be? She's already dying, we know that. She's lying on her back, and he's carving away at her neck. What was he trying to do? Was he trying to paint an even more terrible picture for those troopers to find the next day? How much more did he do than was even necessary to kill Colleen Ritzer? How much did it take? Concentrated, purposeful effort to use this to do to her what you will see in those autopsy photos, in that crime scene photo from the woods. He had 25 minutes to do that and to cover her with leaves framed by that fence. And yes, when he emerges from the woods, he is covered in blood all down the front of his jeans. Not like when he left the bathroom. His jeans are saturated. His socks are so saturated they've dried hard. The sneakers, which you saw no blood on when he left the bathroom, they're left in the woods covered in blood after those 25 minutes in the woods, not after the time in the bathroom. And he makes his way towards the doorway that is closest to his locker, but then reroutes back towards the academic wing. Was he going to get the things that he left in the shrubs that Carolyn Quigley saw him leave? And he goes directly up to the 3rd floor. He goes to his locker on the 3rd floor. He gets his soccer clothes. He doesn't see anybody. It's after school. People aren't in the academic wing. They're in the field house and the other parts of the school. When he goes to his locker, he gets that backpack he didn't need before, and he goes directly to the closest boys' room, and he changes out of those bloody clothes in the most direct way possible. He's not running all around the school covered in blood. He comes out of the woods, and he emerges in his soccer clothes. He makes his way downstairs, carrying his bloody clothing, fixing his glasses. And yeah, he goes back to the 2nd floor girls' room. Is he checking to see if anyone's discovered her? Is he checking to make sure he didn't drop anything? There's a lot of explanations for why he would double check that girls' room that make a lot of sense, ladies and gentlemen. I would suggest to you he's holding things differently when he exits the girls' room. Did he pick something else up? Did he do something in there? He makes his way out of Danvers High School and back ultimately to the woods. He spends about another 12 minutes in the woods, putting all of the different items and the locations where they will be found. And I would suggest you going through his things and Colleen's and taking what he wanted. Her wallet, her credit cards, some of the things from his school bag, others not. Is he writing that note when he's in the woods with the blue pen that will be found on him in Topsfield? He's doing what he wants for another 12 minutes in the woods, and then he emerges. He puts his shoes on in the shrubs. And yes, now he makes his way to the part of the school where people will be, because he's not covered in blood. He looks like any other kid at soccer practice time. And he runs into Kevin Heber, who did make a connection with him, who did reach out to him, who did support him when he moved to Danvers. But that wasn't important to Dr. Dudley. And they have what Kevin described to you, I would suggest, is a perfectly normal conversation. They make plans for the weekend. He explains that he hasn't been getting Kevin's text because he's out of minutes. Does he look to you like he's staring off into space or mumbling, or is he having a conversation you wouldn't think twice of that Kevin Hebert didn't think twice about? And then, yes, he makes his way through the school in the areas where people will see him first. And his biggest concern, ladies and gentlemen, is that the drawstrings on his backpack are tangled as he makes his way through the school. He makes his way back into the academic wing. And you'll see him digging into his bag, looking for something. Something he needs, something he wants. Something I would suggest to you he's chewing on when he's walking across the 3rd floor. He needed a snack after all of the activities of that afternoon. And then he leaves Danvers High School. And where does he go from there? We know the first place he goes is BJ's. Ladies and gentlemen, are his activities on Endicott Street consistent with psychosis or consistent with Philip Chism doing and getting what Philip Chism wants? He goes to BJ's, and you saw the video from BJ's and heard from the manager. He wants a knife at BJ's. Well, he can't buy a knife at BJ's, because when you look through Colleen Ritzer's cards, you'll see she didn't have a BJ's card. So he can't use her credit card at BJ's. So he skillfully navigates the security system at BJ's, and you saw him on the video. You'll have a chance to see him again, sipping a sports drink, making his way through BJ's. And then what does he do? He goes to the movies. You heard what the financial circumstances were like for the Chisms, that there wasn't a lot of spare money around, that things were tight. So now you have a kid with a credit card. Ladies and gentlemen, if using a stolen credit card is evidence of psychosis or disorganization, then that's a bigger problem. You steal credit cards to use them. That's not mental illness. And ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear, he didn't have a good plan for getting away with this. He's 14 years old. We agree with that. Not a lot of long-term thinking, and he had accomplished already the one thing he really wanted to accomplish in those woods. And he makes his way to Endicott Street. Up Endicott, eventually to Route 1, where he's stopped by the Topsfield police. And then, in direct contradiction to every single image you have seen of him all day, he's acting crazy when he's stopped by the police. He's staring into the distance. He's not answering questions. He's faking bad the first time he's encountered by the police, because that was as close to a plan as he had. Ladies and gentlemen, the witnesses speak for themselves, and you can make your own judgments of the credibility and thoroughness of the psychiatric and psychological witnesses in this case. But what's the importance of malingering? What's the importance of Dr. Heaven's testing? She didn't go in looking for malingering. The test she gave for mental illness, she couldn't trust because they triggered so high from malingering. She was stuck with those results, and those tests that are good enough for everyone else were apparently not good enough for Philip Chism, because be clear, the 2 tests she did for mental illness were meant for juveniles. They were intended for juveniles. But having gotten the test for malingering, she gave him the benefit of the doubt by doing further testing. She didn't skew her results. She lived with her results. They said what they said, and Dr. Kinshirf took them into account along with everything else. Unlike Dr. Dudley, who just ignored malingering, even though his entire opinion relied on the credibility of Philip Chism. Isn't it important to know if he's exaggerating? If you are going to rest your entire opinion on Philip Chism. But he didn't even take it into account. And neither did Dr. Jackson, and in all fairness to Dr. Jackson, he's not evaluating the defendant for criminal responsibility. He's trying to treat him for 20 days. He's trying to take care of him. And I would suggest to you, he agreed the test showed malingering, but it wasn't his job. Isn't that what he said? It wasn't his job to consider malingering. The one person whose job it was didn't do it, and that's Dr. Dudley. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge has repeatedly warned you to guard yourself against sympathy and prejudice in this case. And I certainly join in those warnings, as Ms. Regan did. And I think we all pretty easily understand what sympathy is, maybe more so in a case like this. And we think we understand prejudice, the us's and them's, the thoughts that we have that we guard ourselves against, or at least try not to say out loud. But let me suggest to you that there is a different kind of prejudice, one far more appealing, and one that we hold a lot closer to our hearts. And that's our view of the world, our hope, the idea that things are predictable, that we know what's going to happen, that things are expected. There is not one single person in this courtroom who wants to believe that a 14-year-old boy could have done this and not be crazy. But doing something so awful does not make you crazy. Dr. Kinshirf did look for an explanation, and he found one, and he told you about it in great detail. Ladies and gentlemen, let me respectfully suggest to you that Philip Chism is no more entitled to your prejudice of hope than either side is entitled to any other sympathy and prejudice in this case. I am not going to stand here and tell you there is nothing wrong with Philip Chism. How could I? But I am going to submit that there is overwhelming evidence in this case, beyond any reasonable doubt, that Philip Chism was not suffering from a mental disease or defect on October 22nd of 2013. That Philip Chism knew right from wrong and could choose right from wrong. He did it repeatedly over the course of that afternoon. He just didn't do it when it mattered. He had a goal, a terrible, terrible purpose, and he played it out in the woods, and he didn't care what came after that. Was he distancing himself from friends and not trying in school? Who cares about your friends? Who cares about your math grade when you know what you're gonna do? He drew that picture in his head, and he drew it in those woods with Colleen. Ladies and gentlemen, I have asked you to consider the image of Colleen in the woods, and I will ask you in your deliberations to examine those autopsy photographs for what they tell you about the injuries in this case. But then I would ask you to return to this image of Colleen Ritzer. This was Colleen Ritzer. This is Colleen Ritzer. This is the Colleen Ritzer who was alone in that bathroom and in those woods with Philip Chism, not a mentally ill child, not someone powerless to voices in his head. The only person powerless in those bathroom, in those woods, is Colleen Ritzer, because she was alone with the person who robbed her of her underwear, who raped her again with a tree branch, and who murdered her with deliberate premeditation and with extreme atrocity and cruelty. Ladies and gentlemen, Judge Lowy mentioned to many of you at the beginning of this process that the word verdict comes from the Latin and it means to speak the truth. The truth born of evidence. The truth born of fact. I ask that you go back to the deliberation room, that you carefully examine all of the evidence in this case, and that you return to this courtroom and that you render your verdict. That you find the defendant guilty for the intentional and purposeful and knowing robbery, rapes, and murder of Colleen Ritzer. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, what we're going to do is in about 2 or 3 minutes, I'll see counsel at the sidebar. In about 2 or 3 minutes, we're going to take a recess for about 10 or 15 minutes so that you can be comfortable before the final instructions in this case. I just need to talk to the lawyers for a moment at the sidebar. recess in just a minute. There's nothing for you to talk about. Matter of fact, it's going to take me about, I'd say at least an hour and 15 minutes, probably longer than that, to teach you the law that applies to this case. You'll ultimately find the facts from the evidence and follow the law as I instruct you, applying the facts as you find to the law in order to return a verdict. I remind you, as I did before the closings, that the closings are not evidence in the case. It's the opportunity of the attorneys to argue to you from the evidence. It's your collective memory of the evidence and your collective memory of the evidence alone that controls, and that you just do not decide this case based on pity, sympathy, fear, or favor for or against either side. All right, what we'll do is we'll take a recess, and if everybody's ready in 20 minutes, we'll have you come in 20 minutes for the final instructions. If you're not ready, let the court officer know that you need more time.
All rise.